Hello and welcome back. I'm a sociology guy. I'm an experienced A-level sociology teacher and examiner for one of the major exam boards. Today I'm going to be looking at the concept of globalization and crime. This is obviously for paper 3 of the AQA Summer Series 2018. What I would sort of like suggest is this is one of the tougher questions that students find, putting together all the little pieces of how crime is impacted by globalization. But before we get started, I just want to sort of like update. I know that sort of like when people are revising, they do tend to become quite alienated from the world. So I'm just going to let you know some of the things that have been going on globally. Obviously, last week I looked at the idea that Love Island had been scheduled really poorly and had been scheduled for sort of like during the exam season, which was quite clearly done by a middle-class male. Well, ironically, the World Cup starts shortly after the exams, shortly before the end of the exam season. So like for those of you who are into global events such as the World Cup, unfortunately, because of your revision, you will probably miss the titanic battle that is Russia versus Saudi Arabia. I'm not going to say anything politically about that one. And you also will miss Egypt versus Uruguay during your exam. I know that many of you will be really disheartened by this and the idea of Mohamed Salah up against Luis Suarez. That'll be interesting. But the good news, the really positive news, is that you'll be out of the exam in time to catch Morocco versus Iran. What a clash of the titans that is. Other global news, the G8 potentially could be reforming. I've never seen this much excitement since Take That got Robbie Williams back on tour with them. Obviously, this is showing how culturally relevant I am to your teachers and not to you. The idea is that sort of like, Donald Trump has suggested maybe Vladimir Putin should join the band again. So for some of their greatest hits like Money, 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 a cover of ABBA's song. And of course, it wouldn't be complete without our Love Island update. In Love Island this week, obviously many of you are missing this because you were revising so hard. Kendall has left. Yeah, I'm not sure whether Kendall is male or female, but apparently Kendall has left. Also, the people on Love Island were discussing Brexit yesterday. Okay, that is obviously some high-level intellectual stuff going on there that will probably change the course of European history. And some more random people arrived hoping for their 5 minutes of fame. What I would say to you, sociology is more important than Love Island. Unfortunately, Love Island will probably last longer than the sociology A-level. So, ahead of this kind of discussion, just my usual disclaimer, I have absolutely no knowledge of what is going to be on the A-level exams. I have created this question and I've created the item. It's not been created by AQA. It's based on the types of questions they may ask. It's been based on question types that haven't appeared so far on the specimen papers or on the AS and A-level exams up until June 2018. And the way I'm going to answer this question is my way of answering it. There are other ways in which you could still score full marks. I'm approaching this from the viewpoint of an 18-year-old who has studied sociology for 2 years, and I'm targeting sort of like an A and A-star grade in this question. So let's have a quick look at the question. There it is. The growth of globalization has led to many changes in contemporary society. Global patterns of consumption and production, travel, technological changes and media influences have all impacted on everyday life as a result of globalization. But one aspect of globalization that has often been overlooked is its influence on crime. Globalization has also caused international crises and insecurity, global inequality and exploitation, and some sociologists argue that this has led to newer forms of crime and more crime being committed. And then a very generic question, applying the material from item A and elsewhere, evaluate the impact of globalization on crime. Okay, that might seem like a big question. And students may be looking at that and going, oh my God, I don't even know where to begin. What would I do about globalization? Well, of course, what we have to do is we have to look at the item. I've highlighted a couple things here. Global patterns of consumption and production. That to me is hinting at transnational corporations and potentially the spread of things like relative deprivation. Travel, that hints at human trafficking, drugs trafficking, arms trafficking. Technological changes, a little bit of a hint there maybe at cybercrime, or at what we call economic globalization, the way money is transferred over the globe. Media influences, of course, we could maybe look at that in terms of state crime, the influence of globalization and global media on state crime, and sort of like how it has been reported. As a result of globalization, one aspect of globalization often been looked at as influence on crime. Okay, the next bit we'll look at is international crises. So international crises, things like global warming, the war on terror, insecurity, obviously risk society, and increased global risk consciousness. Global inequality, of course, we could look at poverty elsewhere in the world, and exploitation, again going back to sort of things like transnational corporations and green crime. So there are a number of different concepts that we could discuss in this essay. Ordinarily, I would say 6. I've stuck to 5 for this one, but I have mixed in some other concepts as well. It's a 5-paragraph essay with a conclusion, with an introduction. Okay, so let's look at some of the concepts you might discuss. Now, you might be mistaken for actually thinking this is the Conservative Party's manifesto. It's not. These are some of the concepts we might discuss in globalization and crime. So things like corporate crime, money laundering, people trafficking, drugs trafficking, cybercrime, the awareness of state crime, green crime, terrorism, and organized crime. And here's my introduction. Globalization is a process of the world becoming more interconnected. So I've defined globalization straight from the off. As this has happened, it has presented new opportunities for criminal activity. Item A, again, trying to use the item in the first paragraph, states that there has been a wide range of newer forms of crime and more crime being committed as a result of globalization. Crimes such as drug and human trafficking, money laundering, corporate crime, and the growth of organized crime can all be argued to have been impacted by the growth of globalization. Furthermore, newer crimes such as cybercrime and green crimes are being committed. The growth of globalization has also led to the movements against globalization and can said to be a reason for the increase of global terrorism. Okay, there's a lot of concepts packed into there. What I'm going to do in the main body is I'm going to unpack those. Okay, as always, with the main body, I would suggest, like in the first line of the paragraph, you apply your idea, then explain what you mean by that idea, analysing it, showing your deeper understanding, maybe giving some examples, showing that you understand how the process works, what happens, and then evaluating it by using either a strength or a weakness, a criticism, or even some academic support for the idea. So let's jump straight in. Let's look at paragraph 1. One impact of globalization on patterns of crime has been the growth of global organized crime. Globalization has led to changes in the patterns of employment, and as such has driven people suffering from relative deprivation to seek out illegitimate opportunities to achieve their goals. Little bit of a hint here at sort of like things like strain theories. But Glennie's research into McMafia's has highlighted the extent to which globalization has led to the development of organized crime. With the breakup of the Soviet state, many Russian capitalists turned to former KGB operatives to protect their investments, which in turn grew and began to dominate world criminal economies such as drugs, human trafficking, and arms trafficking. Okay, if you haven't had the opportunity to watch Misha Glennie's TED Talk, he explains how this happens, and it is a really, really useful way of explaining globalization and the impact of globalization on crime. My evaluation of that is saying that globalization has also led to the development of disorganized groups. Hobbes and Dunningham looked at this idea that there were many loosely connected networks of criminal behavior, and also some that were not only illegal, but some that were legal means. In other words, in how to in other ways to make money. However, globalization has also led to the development of disorganized crimes, as highlighted by Hobbes and Dunningham, loosely connected groups working with each other in order to pursue both legitimate and illegitimate interests, However, these ideas can be argued not to be a result of globalization, as many organized crime families existed prior to globalization, such as the mafia and local gangs across the UK. And one of the examples they give in the Webb and Trobe textbook is of the Cray twins in East London in the 1960s. Now, that is not part of globalization. We cannot say that gang culture and organized crime exists because of globalization. What we can say is that it has spread massively, and Misha Glenny's work on the mafia certainly highlights that. Second paragraph is looking at green crime. So globalization has led to an increase in green crimes, which green criminologists define as being harm to the environment. With the greater interconnectedness of nations, damage to the environment, whether legal or illegal, has been seen as a transgressive crime and one that does not respect borders. So this is me showing how globalization has impacted on the amount of crimes that are being committed. I will evaluate this later on and suggest, well, is all green crime crime? But I've used a bit of analysis here. Primary green crimes such as pollution and deforestation, particularly in the developing world, are a direct result of development policies of international governmental organisations such as the IMF and World Bank. And these crimes, while not necessarily illegal, are causing irreversible harm to the environment in pursuit of economic development. Secondary green crimes, such as the dumping of hazardous materials by TNCs or eco-mafias, particularly in the developing world, are as a direct result of corporations chasing profit. This is problematic, as in much of the developing world there are few environmental protections, or nations lack the power and influence to prosecute the criminals. The simple idea I'm trying to put forward here is, because of globalization, a lot of the environmental problems that we may have had from the Industrial Revolution onwards in the UK have now been shifted to the developing world. It is a lot cheaper to dispose of toxic waste in the developing world than it is in the developed world, because it is more highly legislated. We've also seen, as part of globalization, the shifting of production to other parts of the world. So it is almost natural that the waste that is being produced and the pollution that is being caused by the production of goods and services is going to be more based in the developing world now, because that's where the major production base is. An evaluation of that is methodological criticism of green criminology. It's been criticised as lacking objective measurement of crime. If nations do not make the dumping of toxic waste or deforestation illegal, then no crime is actually being committed. Even if we in the West may see this as being moral, or as being immoral or unethical, whether there are political arguments for or against the case, it is not illegal. So therefore, we have to question the methodology of green criminologists. A better explanation is offered by the green criminologist South, who refers to the harms that are done to the environment as a form of environmental discrimination, that the poorest parts of the world tend to have the worst environment as a consequence of globalization. Our next paragraph looks at state crime. Now, although globalization may cause some state crime, I think it is the awareness of state crime that has been exacerbated by globalization. A further impact of globalization on crime has been the growing awareness of state crimes. There's my application. My explanation is by using a couple of examples. In recent years, with increased media coverage, the awareness of crimes committed by the state against its own people has increased, such as ethnic cleansing in Myanmar, genocide in Rwanda, and the current situation in Syria, to name but a few. The impact of globalization can also be said to have influenced the economic colonization of certain nations. So I'm showing a deeper understanding of how state crime is happening by saying that it's not just some of these issues like genocide. We are potentially looking at economic globalization and sort of like how control of the economy can be a state crime. Through the development of neoliberal economic policy and the privatization of state industries in the aftermath of war, a term Naomi Klein refers to as disaster capitalism. If you haven't seen Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, it is really worth watching. Whether you are a sociology student or not, or whether you are going to use it in your exams, it is really worth looking at to see the impact of neoliberalism. Furthermore, the reactions of other states in response to these events has led to an increase in state-sponsored terrorism, which is another state crime. So the process of globalization has led to more terrorism. I'm linking this in as well as being part of a state crime. However, like with green criminology, it's very difficult to measure the extent of state crime. William Chambliss suggests that the state makes the law, and therefore it acts. And therefore, when it does act, it can be seen as legal, even if they breach what we in the West, again, would consider to be moral and ethical. If we look at the Holocaust as an example, everything that was done by Nazi Germany was legal, even though it was very, very questionable ethically and morally. I mean, it was abhorrent, but it was legal. So, as a consequence, Schwendinger and Schwendinger, try and pronounce that after a few beers, they would argue that we shouldn't really be trying to measure state crime. What we should be looking at is the violation of human rights. And we could argue that sort of the awareness of human rights violations has increased with the growth of globalization. We all become aware of human rights violations in places like Saudi Arabia and China. And as a consequence, our knowledge of these state crimes or these human rights violations is greater. Moving on to paragraph 4, I'm now going to introduce the idea of corporate crime. The increase of corporate crimes can also be seen to be a product of globalization. Taylor suggests that the free rein given to market forces in the era of neoliberal globalization has led to increased inequality and rising crime. Many of these crimes are being committed by the capitalist classes. What we are looking at here is cost-cutting exercises to improve profit, such as by BP and Halliburton in the Deepwater Horizon oil rig disaster, or the involvement of Union Carbide in the Bhopal disaster, have led to the deaths and injuries of many humans and animals. The Rana Plaza collapse was also due to cutting corners on health and safety, while some have accused some transnational corporations such as Coca-Cola and Shell of having paramilitary links and using force to stop opposition to their employment practices or expansion plans. The impact of globalization as pretty much meant a free-for-all for transnational corporations to do as they wish, because many nations in which they are operating do not have the economic might of some of these big TNCs, and therefore they are less likely to be prosecuted. However, it can be argued that many TNCs are held up to international law, with lawsuits against TNCs accounting for $150 billion a year. This is according to the World Trade Organization. Furthermore, it's been argued that the process of globalization and the role of TNCs in that has brought many benefits to the developing world, to other parts of the world, bringing in things like formal employment, higher standard of living, increased consumption of capital goods, bringing these nations forward into the 21st century. So, as you can see here, I've evaluated this and made it a balanced paragraph by saying that sort of there is corporate crime and that corporate crime is increased. Yeah, that might be the case, but also what we are seeing is we're seeing many benefits delivered by corporations, and as a consequence, this can be seen as a criticism of the idea that globalization has led to more corporate crime. Our final paragraph is looking at the level of the final impact of globalization on the level of crime is the increase in trafficking operations due to increased international travel. Drugs trafficking, human trafficking, and arms trafficking have all benefited from the expansion of international travel. Globalization has created more movement of people across the globe, and as a consequence, many illegal activities go unnoticed due to the higher volumes of traffic. This allows drugs and human traffic to move through areas with weaker border controls into free movement areas such as the EU, and as a consequence, flood the European and American markets with illegal goods that have originated in Afghanistan, for example, heroin, and South America, cocaine. This is also true of international financial transactions. So again, I'm bringing in a little bit more of the white-collar crime here. With increasing money laundering through global banking, recently it was evidenced that sort of like banks in the City of London had been found to be laundering money for the Russian mafia. However, one argument against this free movement is the kind of backlash against globalization post 9/11. The increased security operations of private industries such as homeland security has actually led to a heightened risk consciousness. It has led to increasing checks on security at airports and ports due to the threat of terrorist activity and immigration. Combined with things like Brexit hysteria in the UK, it led to an increase in crimes against migrants, and could be argued that the backlash against globalisation is causing newer forms of racially motivated crimes. What I tried to do in this whole essay is put forward 3 or 4, maybe 5 ideas as to how globalisation has impacted on crime. Now what I have to do is my smartass paragraph, is that sophisticated paragraph which ties everything together and starts to actually answer the question as whether or not globalisation has had such an impact on crime. So this is what I would set out if I were an 18-year-old. It can be argued that the period of globalisation, that which has been narrowly defined as being as after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War to the present day, has led to an increase in the awareness of and differentiation of different types of crimes. Greater global interconnectedness has also led to increases in crime such as cybercrime, which accounts for a large percentage of crimes recorded in the UK. However, it can be argued that many of these crimes existed prior to globalisation. For example, human trafficking is not new, as evidenced by the triangular slave trade. We've been enslaving humans and transporting them to other parts of the world for hundreds of years before globalisation. Nor is corporate crime. Corporate crime is not new. Essentially, transnational corporations have taken over from colonial powers, what André Gunder-Frank calls neocolonialism. Green crime is not new. It has just shifted from the West now to the developing world. You know, the pollution that was evident in Victorian Britain was massive, but now it's been shifted to the developing world. Nor are state crimes. State crimes are not dependent upon globalisation. State crimes have been happening for many years. You know, look at Britain's involvement in Ireland. Look at Belgian involvement in places like the Congo. Britain's involvement in India. These are all state crimes. You know, Britain turning its own soldiers against striking miners. You know, these are state crimes, and they've existed prior to globalisation, will probably exist long into the future. The impact globalisation has had on crime could be argued not to be one of increasing volumes, rather increasing awareness of these crimes. So my statement is that crime hasn't increased. It is we are more aware of what is going on in the world now, and this is because of the process of globalisation. Okay, and the argument there can be backed up with, for example, terrorism. Terrorism and the war on terror is not new. This has happened before in the 1960s and 1970s. There was a height of terrorism before globalization. There was the ideological warfare of the Cold War, which could be seen to be forms of terrorism. So globalization hasn't increased the amount of terror; it's made us more aware of them. Okay, so thank you for watching this video cast. There are some others up here already. Education and social policy, which was for paper 1, which has gone, yay. Globalization and crime, which is obviously today's. Postmodernity in the family, the impact of globalization on the family. Marxism and crime, feminism and society, and the idea that we are living in a postmodern age, and sociology as a science are just some of those videos that we are going to be putting up over the next week or so. Good luck with your sociology exams, and just remember, by the 15th of June you will be free from sociology unless you are making the decision to go on to university and study it, and why wouldn't you? Thanks for watching. Goodbye.